Simula po nang magkaroon ng Women Lead sa aming komunidad, naimpluwensya nito ang aking desisyon lalo na ang aking sarili sa pamamagitan ng pagiging mulat sa kasulukuyang panahon. Na may karapatan ding marinig ang boses ng mga kababaihan na kasapi ng lipunan na katulad ko.
Bilang isang mangingisdan, sa buhay ko ang prinsipyo ng women led. Dahil unang-una, natibang ako na wala ang stress ko sa pagdaragat. Nakalimutan ko ang hirap ng buhay bilang magdaragat. At saka isa pa, nakatulong ako sa mga kapwa ko kababaihan na asawa ng mga mangingisda. Nahikayat ko sila na magkaroon at nabigyan ng mapagsisimula ang mapagkakakitaan sa tulong ng PKK at ng Care Philippines ng Willie. Kahit na walang nahuhuling isda, hindi na maghihirap kasi meron na rin na kahit paano may mapagsisimula ang negosyo.
Ang tutunan ko sa Feminist ay ang pantay-pantay na pamumuhay sa panahon ngayon kahit anong kasarian at kailangan itong maintindihan ng bawat isa.
Ang nais kong mangyari para sa sunod na henerasyon ng mga kababaihan, kailangan mayroon tayong determinasyon, mangarap sa pamilya, lalo na magpakatatag tayo sa pag-leader sa komunidad. O ma-empowered tayo as a leader ng kababaihan para makita sa komunidad na tayo kaya tumayo bilang mga babae.
The Philippine Open Government Partnership launched its first co-created National Action Plan in December 2019. The international open government commitments that embody the plan aim to contribute towards addressing pressing public problems and achieving a people-centered, clean, and efficient delivery of public services and building a high-trust, peaceful, and inclusive society. Consistent with this aim, implementation of the National Action Plan started at the beginning of 2020, but this was hampered by the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic in the first quarter. The expected delays in implementation of action plans of member countries prompted the OGP Criteria and Standards Subcommittee to issue a resolution allowing extension of plan implementation to another year until August 31, 2022 for the end of term of the cycle 2019 to 2022. The revised Philippine Open Government Partnership National Action Plan is characterized by the same co-creation process that made the former version of the plan the most extensive and inclusive of all the action plans the country had. This revision follows the basic requirements of the OGP's Participation and Co-creation Toolkit 2. Leveraging on available technology and innovation in the midst of the pandemic, the consultation process conducted with commitment holders, non-government partners, and other stakeholders was done using different online or virtual platforms. As government and civic organization operations revert to virtual means for the communication, consultation, and collaboration aspects, the process of National Action Plan revision followed with the orientation on the guidelines of extended implementation and the succeeding bilateral meetings and consultations done online through various online platforms.
Many of us have given so much of ourselves to make sure that this happens. So methodologies have been used, a lot of strategies, many policy changes, many program trusts have been tried and tested, all for the sake of making government at all levels, national to the local, to work for the benefit of the constituents in the communities.
Under the revised 5th National Action Plan, the government and non-government partners are committed to collaborate to achieve the following: strengthen citizen participation in governmental processes, enhance transparency, accountability, and participation in educational service delivery, increase government data utilization through the publication of high-quality datasets on the Open Data Philippines portal, establishment of an efficient and effective technology-enabled participatory validation and reporting mechanism for selected government infrastructure projects that support the monitoring and evaluation policies of the department, institutionalize transparency and accountability in the extractive industries, passage of the Freedom of Information Law and localizing the Freedom of Information Program, fostering industrial peace through the proactive and inclusive engagement of workers and employers in the formulation and/or review of labor and employment policies, working together to create a holistic and integrated approach to improving the lives of children and their families, ensuring Indigenous peoples' mandatory representation in local legislative councils and policymaking bodies, and stakeholders' engagement in harnessing the value of PhilJEP's data. With respect to the COVID-19 response and recovery efforts, the Presidential Communications Operations Office added a milestone to facilitate the proactive disclosure of all COVID-19 related information from national government agencies. Its co-commitment holder, Youth Alliance for Freedom of Information, has additional milestones on the conduct of consultations on the FOI bill, convening of a multi-sector network of CSO advocates for FOI, creating a tech-based tool for feedback from citizen experience on access to information, and creating a tracker of public accessibility of statements of assets, liabilities, and net worth among agencies. The Department of Education considered the distribution of computer packages to learners and educators as an additional focus area for participatory monitoring. Its CSO Education Cluster added activities related to lobbying for an increased budget for the last mile schools in succeeding years and monitoring of domestic resources of local government for the implementation of identified critical education inputs in the last mile school. PS Link Public committed to conduct surveys among public healthcare workers on the extent of the implementation of the Bayanihan to Heal as One Act, specifically on their benefits and other entitlements.
So I call on each and every Filipino, be with us at the front lines of public sector reform. Be active citizens. And as our partners for change, let's continue to ask ourselves difficult questions. Let's listen to each other and co-create targeted and sustainable solutions. Join our crusade and let's go beyond numbers and letters, beyond complicated theories of change, beyond policy papers and lip service. Together, let's deliver felt and measurable results and make government work better for the Filipino people.
The Philippine Open Government Partnership, open by default, policy by the people, accountability for results.
Simula po nang magkaroon ng Women League sa aming komunidad, naimpluwensya nito ang aking desisyon lalo na ang aking sarili sa pamamagitan ng pagiging mulat sa kasulukuyang panahon. Na may karapatan ding marinig ang boses ng mga kababaihan na kasapi ng lipunan na katulad ko.
Bilang isang mangingistan, sa buhay ko ang prinsipyo ng women led. Dahil unang-una, natibang ako na wala ang stress ko sa paglaragat. Nakalimutan ko ang hirap ng buhay bilang magdaragat. At saka isa pa, nakatulong ako sa mga kapwa ko kababaihan na asawa ng mga mangingisda. Nahikayat ko sila na magkaroon at nabigyan ng mapagsisimula ang mapagkakakitaan sa tulong ng PKK at ng Care Philippines ng Willie. Kahit na walang nahuhuling isda, hindi na maghihirap kasi meron na rin na kahit pa paano may mapagsisimula ang negosyo.
Ang tutunan ko sa Feminist ay ang pantay-pantay na pamumuhay sa panahon ngayon kahit anong kasarian at kailangan itong maintindihan ng bawat isa.
Ang nais kong mangyari para sa sunod na henerasyon ng mga kababaihan, kailangan mayroon tayong determinasyon, mangarap sa pamilya, lalo na magpakatatag tayo sa pag-leader sa komunidad. Kung ma-empower tayo as a leader ng kababaihan para makita sa komunidad na tayo kaya tumayo bilang mga babae.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first session for the third day of OpenGov Week 2021. And this is our session on feminist open government. And this is organized in partnership with Care Philippines. My name is Joey Cortina, and I am the gender specialist of Care Philippines. And I am excited because we have a very rich assembly of participants who really made time this morning to learn more about feminist open government and to explore ways in which women's rights organizations can be equal partners in an honest, accountable, and transparent government. So I congratulate everyone because we are all committed to our advocacy of gender equality, and this is a great space for us to fulfill that commitment. So what this session is all about, well, we will be talking about feminist open government, of course, and this is in the context of how we can provide opportunities for women to lead, especially now that we are in unforeseen, unprecedented circumstances due to the pandemic. And this will run from 10 a.m. until 12 noon. And I anticipate a very rich discussion. And if we would have to extend a bit, I hope that our participants, now numbering 60, would be willing to stay because we have a really interesting discussion for this morning. So let's just go through what we intend to accomplish for this 2-hour session. So in the next 2 hours, we will be sharing back findings recommendations and the toolkit, the Feminist Open Government Toolkit, to everyone in this learning session. And this would include not only government stakeholders, but also women's rights organizations who participated in the Feminist Open Government research and dialogues conducted back in 2019. And we're excited because today we will be introducing CARE's Gender Integration Toolkit. And we really believe that this is going to be a helpful tool for everyone who is really committed to increasing feminist spaces in governance. And of course, this doesn't end with just sharing these findings. What we seek to achieve is also to make new partners in our efforts to further develop and also find venues to implement the Gender Integration Toolkit. So to introduce the Philippines Feminist Open Government, or FOGO, research that was conducted back in 2019, I'd like to welcome my colleague who was the former gender specialist of CARE Philippines and is now CARE's Global Humanitarian Partnerships Coordinator. Let's give a warm virtual welcome to Ms. Cara Medina. Cara, over to you.
Thank you, Joey. Magandang umaga po sa lahat. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I see there are local government units that are present, representatives from different national government agencies, and hopefully some civil society representatives. So salamat po for making time. We're so excited to share the findings of our research today. As Joey said, I'm Cara Medina. I am 1/3 of the team that conducted an action research on women's rights organizations and the open government partnership in the Philippines. Can I get the next slide, please? Thank you. So Rebecca, Tam, and I are gender specialists. We are the research team. We are gender specialists in fields such as inclusive governance, conflict, and humanitarian emergencies. In 2019, we studied the Open Government Partnership co-creation process in the Philippines. And this process was about the national government building upon their OGP action plans with local civil society. And what we did was we examined how gender inclusive it is and what role women's rights organizations played in this co-creation. Next slide. I think the question that we can try to answer first is what is feminist open government anyway? Because this is the initiative that our research is under. It's a platform to advance gender equality through the Open Government Partnership. It uses research and action to include gender issues in action plans and adopt more gender-focused commitments. In other words, it's about applying a gender equality and social inclusion lens in the open government process. And this particular lens asks questions like, how are our commitments inclusive of marginalized women, indigenous groups, persons with disability, persons of diverse gender identity and sexual orientation, and more? How do we open and ensure meaningful participation and decision-making for these vulnerable groups? But what we know is that gender responsive or feminist open government is more effective open government. And that is what our research was studying in this research. And what we did in 2019, next slide please, is take a look at the Philippine National Action Plans even before the 5th NAP. And what we've seen is most of them have been gender blind. We know that women are well represented in OGP decision making, but women's organizations and gender experts are not. But the good news is the Philippines OGP is taking steps to make the co-creation process more demand-led and inclusive. So there are ways forward that have already been taken and are continuing to be taken. But why does feminist open government still matter now? And this is what Joey mentioned at the beginning, is especially in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, we see that there are increased barriers to meaningful participation. So there's an uneven access to information and technology in the virtual world. But we also know that emergencies like this pandemic and the multiple emergencies that happen within it, these are agile environments. So there is an opportunity and a space for us to innovate our usual ways of engagement, our usual ways of work. And this is where the FOGO Philippines research comes in. This research and toolkit, these are resources to sustain feminist, open, and participatory government in the time of a pandemic, which is the theme of Open Gov Week 2021. So how did we go about it? What was our research process? Next slide, please. I think what we did was reach out or map women's rights organizations. Why did we reach out? Why did we engage WROs in the first place? Because these are civil society organizations with a very specific focus and core of tackling gender inequality and social exclusion. So we felt that their contribution to the civil society space in the open government co-creation process was extremely important. So what we did was, after mapping them, we supported their participation in 3 regional town hall meetings that was hosted by Philippines OGP. If we remember, this was also done virtually this year, the Dagyao Town Hall Meeting Series and virtual forums. And aside from that, there was a commitment workshop where the 5th National Action Plans were opened to civil society representatives. And side by side with representatives from national government agencies, we talked about the commitments that they were completing. And that was where our WROs were able to input. And then a more focused activity that we did was to facilitate a Gender and the Philippines OGP workshop for 26 of the leaders of these women's rights organizations in the Philippines. And after that, we went on to hold a multi-stakeholder dialogue with national government agencies, specifically DSWD, DALG, and DepEd. And we're thrilled to have some of them here again today to share about what they think of the findings and lessons we have of this research. And throughout the whole process, we worked closely with the Secretariat to incorporate gender in the co-creation tool. So it was in a bid to make the Philippines OGP process more gender responsive in its entirety, not just with the tools, but also with the way that it engaged civil society and women's rights organizations. And we found many interesting things throughout the course of the research. Next slide, please. One of the women's rights activists we talked to, I think it's in the next slide. She said, if all of us come together, the more the better. If you're alone, you won't be paid attention to, but if there's many of you and you have good objectives, you will be listened to. And this is but one quote from when we asked women leaders to reflect on making open government more open and engaging civil society and women's rights orgs more meaningfully. And we have more of these. So now my colleague Rebecca Haynes will share more of what we learned and what we recommend. So over to you, Rebecca.
Thanks so much, Cara. And Joey as well for that very useful background. And thanks for having me today. we really found the process of sort of accompanying the fifth NAP co-creation process really fascinating and interesting. And we also hope that it will be helpful for OGP globally to learn from the process. So just wanted to start with a big thank you to the stakeholders in the Philippines government for their openness, for letting us kind of observe and support the fifth NAP co-creation process. And we can go to the next slide. I'll just pick up where Cara left off. You can click one more time. Just to tell you a little bit about the methods we used when we were in the co-creation process. So as Cara mentioned, we used a mapping process for women's rights organizations so we could sort of better understand the landscape. We did a literature review and we held preliminary discussions with a number of actors in the Philippines to kind of advise us of here are the different types of organizations, here are some recommendations, including in different regions, organizations focusing on different objectives so that we could make sure we had quite a diverse group. You can click again. At the stage of the regional consultations and town hall meetings, we provided both financial support to particular women's rights organization staff members to attend those meetings in different locations, and logistical support to get their flights booked or their travel plans. So this is really where you can see it being an action research, where we're not just observing as researchers, but we're also making an intervention or running activities in the process. You can click again. When the kind of commitment workshops or consultations were happening at the regional level, we were using an observation tool in those sessions, or some of those sessions, to know the ways in which women were participating, or kind of gender equality specialists were before and after their participation. You can click again. Then we did a dedicated workshop in Manila for 26 women's rights organizations, 29 participants. And in that workshop, we did a few things. One, we gave them a really strong background into what OGP was and how the NAP co-creation process works for those who were less familiar with the process. We did some kind of participatory exercises with the participants. One of those exercises was around allowing women's rights organizations to work together to draft some kind of alternative commitments, or the commitments they would like to see in a future NAP. And then they also worked on the draft commitments for the fifth NAP to develop feedback on how they could be more gender sensitive. You can click again. And then finally, we held a kind of dedicated dialogue between specific departments of the government and that group of women's rights organizations about their draft commitments. So we were not able to hold dialogues on the whole NAP because there are many commitments, but we selected a few that were sort of particularly of interest to the women's rights organizations. And we held these kind of direct dialogues with a group of women's rights organizations and wider civil society and the government on making them kind of more gender responsive. Thanks. You can go to the next slide. And so let me just provide some of our findings from the research. We do have a full kind of research paper, and this is the highlights basically from that paper. Before our actual intervention, we did a little bit of research into how things were going so far in terms of gender equality objectives and gender mainstreaming in the Philippines NAPs. As Cara mentioned, we noticed that there was not really a problem in terms of women's participation in the co-creation processes. In fact, many women had participated in the past and were already participating in the fifth NAP. So it wasn't really like a gender issue in terms of the individuals involved or the number of women. However, very few women's rights organizations or activists had been involved or even really 29 participants from our women's rights organization workshop. There were 2 who had participated in some OGP co-creation activity in the past, in like previous NAPs. However, even those cases were a little bit difficult because they either had participated maybe in the second or third NAP, but not been invited consistently through the NAP co-creation processes in different years. And or they weren't really sure what had happened to their feedback, and they had never really seen the final NAP after they participated. So they hadn't seen the product that they contributed to, and they weren't, very familiar about the process and the implementation and what had come after their participation. What we also noticed was that the groups working on gender equality issues who also kind of represent more marginalized women, whether they be women laborers, Indigenous women, ethnic or religious minority women, they were the ones that were really unaware of OGP. So they were the ones who didn't know what OGP was, didn't have an awareness of the NAP development process or previous NAPs. So there's something there about kind of intersectional marginalization. No women's or gender equality organizations were part of the OGP leadership structure, so they weren't really in the kind of decision-making or driver's seat roles. Somewhat of a divide between the civil society actors who were involved in OGP and the gender equality and women's rights kind of social movement actors. So you had sort of governance-focused CSOs involved in OGP, and then you had social movement actors who tended to be unaware or less involved. And then finally, basically what we would say or conclude is that women's participation was not a problem itself, but gender equality expertise and sort of rights-based engagement from women's rights organizations was lacking in the process. You can go to the next slide. So then I want to talk a little bit about what we discovered after participating and kind of accompanying the 5th NAP co-creation process. So what we found was the financial and logistical support, especially the financial support, to women's rights organizations was basically essential to ensure that they did participate in different kind of regional consultations, and the development of the women's rights organization workshop in Manila, where we kind of really facilitated a dialogue with government agencies. That was really where they kind of had the most say. So that kind of intervention, but in particular ensuring that they're financially supported, was pretty essential, even if it wasn't really a lot of money. It wasn't a huge budget, but it was pretty essential. Once that involvement was facilitated, though, the women who participated were very active, and they did bring in perspectives that were not previously there. So honestly, at the beginning, we thought, well, let's see if these women's rights activists and women's rights organization leaders, let's see if they even find this process relevant to their core objectives. So we were not sure going into it. But as we observed throughout the process, we saw them being quite active, and we saw them finding relevance in the process and bringing in new perspectives. We also observed through the survey tool that we were using, the interview tool, that women's rights organization staff felt most prepared, and they were also more sort of active and effective in consultations after they had received the targeted session that was really explaining OGP and how it works and what the NAP does. So they needed kind of preparatory information, because OGP is, quite a big organization. It's quite well established. There are a lot of details. So it's actually a little bit difficult sometimes for civil society to jump right in and participate without a good background. So they felt more confident, basically, after the dedicated session providing information about OGP. But also, because of the workshop we facilitated, the women's rights organization participants had time to examine the draft commitments and prepare their feedback in advance. which was something that was not exactly part of the regional consultations for most community members and civil society actors and local government actors at that level. So that kind of ability to really read through and discuss the draft commitments and then go to a consultation and give feedback was quite critical for women's rights organizations. And the third finding in this section is that not being the only one was quite important in these groups. So not being the only woman or the only member of a women's rights organization. So basically having a critical mass kind of strengthened the voice of women's rights organizations. You can go to the next slide. The key results from the action research intervention we found were that in the 5th NAP co-creation process, more women's rights organizations and more kind of diverse organizations with stronger regional representation participated in the co-creation process than for previous NAPs. So that's kind of a key result. The 5th NAP is the first to include kind of an effort at gender mainstreaming. And out of the 11 commitments that were originally in the 5th NAP, 3 included gender considerations in the problem analyses and 4 included gender-related indicators. So that's the kind of gender mainstreaming, the results of that gender mainstreaming effort. And then finally, some of the commitments in the 5th NAP do respond directly to specific changes and recommendations that women's rights organizations made. So we sort of tracked in our research the recommendations they made and then whether those recommendations were addressed in the 5th NAP. And we did see a relationship where we see how some government agencies were directly responsive to recommendations from women's rights organizations. You can go ahead. What we sort of learned in terms of the challenges that we were not able to sort of address at in the 5th NAP process was because women's rights organizations came in a bit late in the process. So basically they were not included at the agenda setting phase, the part where people or organizations, agencies get to suggest commitments and try to get them included in the draft NAP. They were not involved at that stage. And they were not involved in the leadership structure of OGP. So the ability to kind of shape the early content of the NAP was not there. They became involved a little bit later when the drafts were sort of available and they could start giving feedback on the drafts. And what happens is that as we learned from the exercise in the workshop we held, where we were allowing women's rights organizations to suggest their own commitments and kind of do like an early draft of the commitments they would like to see. What we saw is that actually the sort of overall NAP agenda that women's rights organizations would like to see was not really reflected in the 5th NAP. So while there's gender mainstreaming in the 5th NAP, the agenda does not really overlap strongly with the top priorities of women's rights organizations. So for example, when we had them develop sort of alternative commitments, they tended to focus on gender and women's rights issues in emergencies, so in emergency response measures, gendered impacts of conflict and security, data for addressing GBV and domestic violence, women's roles in peace and reconstruction processes, and feminist environmental concerns. So that's kind of like very broadly the agenda that they were sort of as a group suggesting for an OGP NAP. In the full research paper, we discussed those kind of alternative commitments in a little bit more detail in terms of the content that the women's rights organizations were kind of thinking about together. One of the other issues was that when women's rights organizations had the opportunity to really examine the draft commitments and kind of prepare their feedback, they were actually not holding the most up-to-date or the most developed draft commitments that were available. And that was kind of true across the subnational or regional consultations with communities and civil society and local governments, is that as the draft commitments were being continuously worked on and further developed, those more developed drafts were not getting circulated out into the consultation process. So people were actually responding to drafts that were quite a bit older and kind of less developed than the ones that were actually available at that time. And Also, we noticed just when we were comparing women's rights organization feedback with the final NAP, some of the feedback was not incorporated, and some of the commitments remained largely gender blind. So we kind of concluded that even though there was some guidance around gender mainstreaming, it wasn't sort of at the level of minimum standards where a commitment would not be accepted if it didn't reach at least some minimum standards around gender mainstreaming. You can go to the next slide. So we wanted to share kind of our 5 key takeaways from the research. You can go to the next slide. Lesson 1, bring women's rights organizations and activists in at the agenda setting stage of the co-creation process. So bring them in. You know, our research showed us that their preferred agenda would have looked quite different than the content of the 5th NAP. And this is not sort of us suggesting that women's rights organizations will fully shape the agenda of a NAP. We understand that there's a lot of different objectives and interests coming in, but bringing women's rights organizations in at the beginning where they can take leadership, they can convene, they can express priorities at the very early stages might mean that they have a chance of the next NAP including more content that overlaps with the women's rights organization agendas that exist or the kind of gender equality movement more broadly. And I think that's a real benefit to really everyone, because I think women's rights organizations and gender equality organizations would then take greater ownership over the NAP and want to be more involved in the implementation process if there was a little bit more overlap between their kind of pre-existing core objectives and agenda and the NAP. And one recommendation we have is, in order to maybe, especially maybe as an experiment or a trial, consider just reserving one spot or one commitment space for one women's rights and gender equality focused commitment. Certainly still mainstreaming across the other commitments, but if you reserved a spot, you might be able to trial in the next NAP whether you could really rally women's rights organizations around the implementation of that kind of one reserved commitment. That would maybe be an interesting experiment. You can go ahead to the next slide. Lesson number 2, we found it extremely important to have done that kind of original mapping of the women's rights and gender equality movement, the different organizations. And that seems really critical to know the gender equality movement landscape in its diversity, both kind of geographical diversity, but also in terms of the issues that they are focused on, to avoid kind of inviting the same few people or the same few organizations, potentially kind of at the last minute when we realize we haven't included them very robustly, to make sure we're getting a real kind of diversity of the movement involved. That could be, you know, building off an existing mapping, or it could also be reaching out to women's rights organization networks that exist. Gender studies programs at universities are usually very well informed about the landscape. So, you know, consulting with some kind of key actors to get some advice on how to build a really kind of diverse invitation list from the movement. We found that really critical, and also maintaining a database that can be built on year, instead of reinventing the list each cycle, such that, you know, there's some people are invited in one cycle, but then they are not invited in the next. So it's difficult to kind of build on the knowledge and experience that they gain. So yeah, use these kind of supports to invite diverse women's rights organizations that are representing kind of different types of women's concerns. You can go to the next slide. Our third lesson was the importance of those funds and those logistical supports. So try to earmark funds in the budget for at least the women's rights organizations that cannot otherwise participate if they don't have some kind of funding support. You know, some organizations are better funded than others. We know how that works, and some just have access to donor funding in ways that others don't. Often the kind of smaller, more subnational organizations struggle a lot more with funding. So kind of think through how to prioritize a bit of support, especially for travel, Of course, because of the pandemic, when we're thinking a lot less about travel, it could actually present a real opportunity to get more diverse people into the room without travel costs. So then you just have to kind of think about their communication support. Do they need phone credit, or do they need support in terms of having a good Wi-Fi connection, which is less expensive. So it could actually be a good opportunity. You can go to the next slide. Our lesson number 4, specific gender mainstreaming minimum standards. We did actually see gender mainstreaming guidance in the 5th NAP process, which is already a very significant and not actually yet very common across OGP co-creation processes in the world. So that's actually really good to see. Communicating them as minimum standards and making sure to get a little more specific. One thing we noticed was the clearest way to do some form of gender mainstreaming for some government agencies is to include a gender-related indicator in the kind of monitoring section of the commitment. But that indicator tends to be like how many women participated. So it's kind of at the level of counting the number of women that are reached through the commitment. And that's a pretty, early stage of gender mainstreaming. So thinking more about the differential impacts of the problem on people of different genders, thinking more about how to address gender equality issues through the commitment could be a stronger way of thinking about gender mainstreaming. But ultimately, I think most of those developing commitments need pretty clear guidance and need it to be communicated as these are minimum standards. They are part of a requirement, so that you don't end up with some gender blind commitments at the end of the process. And you can go to the next slide. Our final kind of major takeaway, sorry, I'll just look at 5 targets for a more gender responsive NAP. Greater participation of gender equality activists and women's rights organizations. Not just greater participation, but from more diverse sectors and geographical locations, and also representing marginalized women. So thinking specifically about which women are marginalized from these kinds of processes and which organizations represent them. Better quality participation of gender equality activists and women's rights organizations. And by better quality, we mean early inclusion, decision-making roles for them, timely sharing of drafts and information so they can be very well informed when they give their feedback. More gender-related commitments, so just a higher number of commitments that are really targeting gender equality issues, and higher quality gender-related commitments. And when we say higher quality, we mean more relevant to the key priorities of women's rights organizations and gender equality movement actors. So that's what we would call a more gender responsive NAP. Those are the kind of targets we're looking. Now I want to the toolkit that we are developing. After the research during the 5th NAP, we did develop a draft toolkit. And right now, actually, we're in the process of doing sort of a final consultation with some OGP actors globally to refine that toolkit and then produce it in a way that we can make it available to really all OGP actors. The idea of the toolkit is to have something that provides a template or a set of templates that any country or subnational government that is going through the co-creation phase of OGP can grab these tools, adapt them, and use them in their own process. And we've tried to design tools that sort of address some of the problems that we encountered and some of the things that were trialed and seemed to be working when we were working accompanying the 5th NAP process in the Philippines. The first one is kind of what we're calling a self-assessment tool. It's not really for individual use in that sense of self-assessment, but it's supposed to be for OGP stakeholders to sit down together, whether it's people inside of a particular government agency, whether it's the civil society side, to kind of sit down and think through, is our co-creation process set up to be gender responsive? And it's essentially a checklist. So it's kind of going through different elements of the process. Is this lacking right now, and kind of essentially scoring, giving yourself a self-produced score. So we will try to look at the enabling environment for integrating gender and inclusion, the conditions that are in place for kind of diverse participation from gender equality organizations, and the conditions for really kind of meaningful participation. So really having a strong voice and having influence in the process. Through this tool, that's what we're calling gender inclusion and power self-assessment. You can look at the next slide. We also have provided, in order to kind of address that issue of having women's rights organizations involved in the early kind of agenda setting stage, we've also looked at how to help women's rights organizations and others really reflect on commitments. So really reflect on the content of the commitments that are being developed. And we've developed a reflection tool that will help people do kind of a basic gender analysis of an individual draft commitment. And we've basically developed these questions based on the questions that did already exist in the Philippines 5th NAP process that we're helping government agencies and civil society reflect on the gender content of a draft commitment. And we've also kind of built on that to add in some other ways to think about the gender content of a draft commitment. You can go to the next slide. Yeah, so, and then we've also included in the toolkit templates for conducting an early workshop with women's rights organizations. So essentially at the agenda setting stage before commitments have been suggested, we've developed a template for a workshop agenda and a slide deck that would sort of help facilitate a workshop with women's rights organizations and gender equality activists to kind of walk through the process of helping them develop suggested commitments and think through what they need to do to try to advocate for those commitments in a particular NAP. So that's about getting them in early for shaping the content of the NAP. You can go to the next slide. And then the next two tools are about conducting a second workshop with women's rights organizations later in the process, once you already have draft commitments. So this is more about reviewing the content of the drafts, performing sort of gender analysis on that content, providing feedback, and kind of strengthening the gender equality content of existing draft commitments. And again, this part of the toolkit has a draft agenda, like a workshop agenda, and a draft slide deck for a facilitator. So that's just a quick look at the toolkit of what it currently includes. And our hope is to refine these a little bit more through the current consultation process, and then get these out so people can take them and use them and change them and do whatever they want to them. They're intended to be entirely adaptable. I want to stop there. I think we have some reactors that we're keen to hear from to give a little bit more insight into their experience of the 5th NAP co-creation process and their experience of having women's rights organizations involved. And then we're also quite keen to hear, because we're in the middle of a consultation process about this toolkit, we're really keen to hear feedback about, what would you want to see in a toolkit? What's the kind of thing that you really need to do this better? What would you find useful, basically? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rebecca, for that very thorough discussion on the FOGO research process and also the toolkit. And this is really exciting. And just to give a brief like overview of what you have discussed. I guess in a lot of initiatives towards social inclusion, maybe at the risk of oversimplifying things, I think it's important to remember the three R's, which was covered actually in your presentation. So representation is very important in terms of representing women's rights organizations' voices in all phases of the co-creation process. And also representation in terms of a rich diversity, because the Philippine women's movements is it's very it's not monolithic. It's very there's different sectors within the sectors, and it's great if all of these issues are represented in the leadership. Also, another R is resources. So funds are very important, as you mentioned, the support that was given in terms of travel assistance. And now we have the opportunity to do that by providing com support because of the movement of all of our activities to online spaces. And also another R is results tracking. So it's very important because you did say that while there were 11 commitments, only 3 out of those were gender mainstreamed, and only 4 had specific gender indicators. So it's important for us to have good indicators, because this is the way that we can track our progress, and that these indicators have very meet minimum mainstreaming standards. So we have in total 4 reactors who will share their insights and their experience in their commitments. The first one would be from the Department of Education, Ms. Tess Salud. Over to you, Ms. Tess.
Hello, excuse me. Hello. Am I heard or am I seen already?
Yes, good morning.
Oh,
Yes,
good.
we just want to
Yeah,
get your reaction.
yeah. Well, actually, I really had a very nice time listening to Rebecca of her findings and the takeaways from the research as well as the moving forward, So on behalf of DepEd, the Department of Education, good morning to all the organizers, the participants and guests of this event with the theme Sustaining Open and Participatory Government in this time of the pandemic. Thank you very much for inviting me to join you in this activity for a learning exchange, as you dub it as a Ready, Set, FOGO. Is that something that I should pronounce it right? A feminist open government and women living in the better normal. Actually, inspiration and encouragement are what we or what so many of us need these days, me included. The inspiration to look beyond the difficulties and challenges of today, and the encouragement to look and move forward a bit in these little steps to a better tomorrow. Encouragement, especially to the women, and of course to our men partners who are our, shall we call, partners in being about a brighter tomorrow. Again, I'm happy that we are able to gather here in this manner despite the present situation. And a little more than how many months it's going to be the end of the first semester of the year. By the way, it dawned on me that it's almost 2 years since the last time we had our meeting. It was a face-to-face seminar workshop we had, and how we were able to integrate somehow of mainstream gender dimension in the training and in the formulation of the agency commitment to the Open Government Partnership under the PIP NAP. Since then, we at the Department of Education continue to fulfill our course to submit our commitment to ensure the delivery of public basic education, inputs and services to our schools and learners are better addressed. I'd like to you to refresh our mind that the DepEd commitment is some sort of the adoption of a participatory government or participatory monitoring and evaluation platform to complement the work of the department in ensuring the needs and gaps in delivering basic education inputs. According to our commitment, basically the mechanism seeks to strengthen the capacity of DepEd in monitoring and accounting for investments made whether they reach the rightful recipient public schools, match the actual needs on the ground, and serve the intended learning outcome. The global open government partnership actually extended the implementation of agency commitment. And we submitted that as a result of the guidelines provided by the DBM or the PH-OGP Secretariat for us to adjust or recalibrate our commitment. So we already submitted that. And in response, the calibrated commitment is what we are referring to now, and we are working towards the delivery of the timelines as stated in the commitment. Well, of course, education is not the sole responsibility, you know, of our commitment, you know, and some of these really are trying to find out what exactly do we have to consider, you know, in looking at how we will be able to comply with our sort of uh, commitment in terms of looking at how far we can go in terms of looking at gender mainstreaming. What I can see is that the gender integration or the gender mainstreaming is really an indispensable condition or element in the success of the delivery of our commitment, in the achievement of our commitment. And since it offers the possibility of introducing the greater degree of accountability and credibility into the governance. I am very, shall we say, very happy, very delighted that there is this gender integration tools developed or still being developed, and I think this is again the a subject of a series of consultations to get it finalized. But generally, the tools really are very useful. It would somehow serve as the barometer by which the national government agencies, together with its CSO partners, you know, in the delivery of the commitment, may be able to use. And that's exactly what we would like to come up with. I am not, and I would say, uh, I myself happen to be a gender and development advocate. I consider, and I've been into this women and development concerns, mainstreaming for more than 20 years. So injecting exactly the women or the gender and development dimension in an agency like the Department of Education is a challenge. A challenge perhaps way back so many years ago when my mentors from the Philippine Commission on Women and the former NCRFW, my mentor Remy Riquet, would say that education really is a vital and a very essential vehicle. You know, even from what we say from womb to tomb, that we have to really come up with something that our children and our learners should be able to, shall we say, imbibe these values since childhood. So I would say that in general, we welcome the development of these gender tools. And I, for one, this may not be exactly the final thoughts or takeaway from what you have shared, but I'm looking forward to a more strengthened co-creation process to be able to develop and adapt these gender tools for all agencies for that matter, not only for DepEd, but for all the national government agencies. And again, if I may put forward my suggestion, I guess it's not too late yet. How can we, shall we say, adopt a mechanism by which these gender tools may be uh, applied or adopted by the government agencies, not only for those who have signified commitments in the OGP, but basically, this is again, the vehicle by which the women and development, the gender and development should really be there. And at the end of the day, you shouldn't be looking at something that you are just forced by certain guidelines that you should do this, but try to institutionalize at the very onset, at the very outset of planning, in budgeting, in programming, as well as in monitoring and evaluation, in accounting, in reporting, what we have done for the men and women, or the women and men for that matter, in the areas of education, in the areas of the delivery of social services in particular. Our commitment is something that will make sure, though this is what is lacking perhaps, and this is now it dawned on me. And I should say we need to go back to the commitment itself and find out how can we still articulate the gender dimension in the commitment. I guess it is not too late yet for that to happen. I am looking at something that what will force the government agencies, not only DepEd, to again revisit their respective commitments and find out how can we enhance and put in this gender dimension in the respective commitments of the agencies. Um, uh, we, I am not saying that in the case of DepEd, we are not women because our very own secretary is a women and development advocate. And I would say, and she is even a CSO, coming from, and she came from the Budget Watch. And at the same time, during my time at the Department of Budget and Management, I'm also a CSO there at the time. So, it's quite something that you need to reflect on. And this is not exactly uh, and this time of the pandemic that we are here under quarantine, it's time to pause and reflect and how can we improve this. Okay, so much so that again, thank you very much. And I've been seeing some names on the chat box that I know, and I think they are also can still remember me. I saw the name of Celia Flor there. They are my colleagues during those times when I was with the women's uh, women. But actually, I'm doing some work also for gender and development. So again, my thanks, and on behalf of Secretary Liling Briones, hi Miss Celia, Liling Briones, who will be in a dialogue on Friday with the development partners as well as with the committee on PH-OGP. So magandang umaga sa lahat at looking forward to a more strengthened co-creation process in the coming days. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ma'am Tess. That's a very thorough and very insightful reaction. And we are really inspired that your commitment towards mainstreaming in all the roles that you've had with government. So this is an inspiration to our younger government stakeholders to take after your indefatigable commitment. And
Thank you very much as well. Yeah.
thank you, Ms.
Thank
Tess.
you.
Also, you mentioned that men should also be involved in creating in gender mainstreaming. And as a matter of fact, our next reactor is also a testament that men can be equal partners towards greater gender equality. We have from the DILG SLGP Project Management Office, Mr. Aline Lopez.
Yeah, thank you, Miss Joey. Good morning, everyone. First of all, I would like to express our regret in behalf of the meeting to attend to and asked me instead to represent the SLGP PMO. When in response to the question, how did the action research process and the greater involvement of women's rights organizations influence our OGP commitment? I would say that it caused the DILG to commit gender responsive and inclusive implementation of commitment activities. In particular, the DILG has committed to, number one, invite diverse set of advocacy groups or sector, including women and the LGBT, to committed policy and or stakeholders consultations. And second, publish gender disaggregated data on citizens' feedback mechanism portal. Well, our commitment activities which involve the diverse set of advocacy groups or sector include, number one, the conduct of policy discussions on transparency and public participation in the budget process with government and non-government stakeholders. We hope to be able to facilitate the issuance of an updated policy guidelines on transparency and public participation in the budget process. And two, the conduct of town hall meetings in all regions. Well, this is still being designed, especially on how it will be implemented this year. We have been implementing this program in the past years. Well, the conduct of town hall meetings are aimed to provide citizens with a venue to give feedback on government programs and projects. And third, the establishment of public portal for the citizens' feedback system for government projects, where we already have an online feedback mechanism, which we call DevLive, where citizens can provide comments online on the implementation of the DILG's assistance to municipalities projects in around 1,400 municipalities nationwide. We are planning to include other national funded projects in this online platform, and we committed to publish gender disaggregated data on this citizens feedback mechanism portal. Well, we have another commitment which we have yet to figure out how to involve the diverse set of advocacy groups or sectors. This is the conduct of CISO webinars to be participated by at least 1,800 CISO members of the local special bodies in selected provinces, cities, and municipalities. We expect the webinars to be conducted sometime in July or August 2021. But in 2022, it will be provided to all CISO members of the local special bodies after their reconstitution as part of our CISO Capacity Development Program. Well, these webinars are aimed to capacitate the CISO members, especially to enable them to effectively participate in the local special bodies, such as the Local Development Council, Local Health Board, and the Local School Board. Now, aside from the OGP commitment, I would just like to inform you that the DILG has also issued memorandum circulars or MCs related to gender and development, which include the following. Una, yung DILG and the Commission of Human Rights Joint Memorandum Circular 2020-01, entitled Ensuring Gender Responsive Interventions to COVID-19 and the New Normal, including prompt, effective, and survivor-centered response to all forms of gender-based violence, which was issued last July 15, 2020. Well, these DILG sheets, our joint memorandum circular, provides the guidelines to all local government units to guide its programming and the implementation of interventions in response to COVID-19 to ensure that women and girls' concerns are responded to during the COVID-19 crisis. And the second is the DILG MC 2020-105 entitled Adoption of the Use of Gender and Development Plan and Budgeting Monitoring System, or GAD-PBMS, issued last July 23, 2020. Well, this MC is issued to provide guidelines on the adoption of the GAD-PBMS starting 2020 by the LGUs, involving all provinces, cities, and municipalities. Yung BLGD, yung Bureau of Local Government Development at the DILG Central Office has been designated as the administrator at the national level and shall have the authority to monitor the overall status of the GAD plan and budget and accomplishment report of all LGUs nationwide. And second, generate the reports needed from the dashboard if necessary. So hence, if information about the status on the GAD plan and budget of the LGUs may be obtained from the BLGD at the DILG Central Office. So this is all for the DILG commitment and GAD-related issuances. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Yes, Ms. Joey.
Thank you very much for sharing DILG's commitments. And again, this hopefully also inspires our other representatives from various LGUs and NGAs on what commitments they can make on their end, on good practices. So this, I think, is all about sharing our good practices for our colleagues to imitate. So for our next reactor, we will call on a representative from Open Government Partnerships. So we would like to hear from Ms. Claire Bautista. Over to you, Ms. Claire.
Hello, magandang umaga po sa ating lahat. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Ms. Zoe. First, let me congratulate and thank CARE International and CARE Philippines for the research that you conducted through the Feminist Open Government Initiative. Your objective to encourage governments and civil society to champion initiatives for gender advancements in and through open government has seen fruition in the most recent PH-OGP action plan, the fifth NAP, covering commitments for implementation from 2019 to 2022. While there was consideration of the Philippine Commission on Women as an agency involved in the DILG commitment in the third NAP, and then in the fourth NAP, the DSWD commitment on improving institutional mechanisms for immediate and effective disaster response, these issues, gender inclusion issues, were not actually tackled in the previous NAPs. Women were well represented in the PH-OGP governance. We have Ms. Pat as co-chairperson of the steering committee, who is a staunch supporter of gender mainstreaming and inclusion. Also, the PH-OGP steering committee is composed mostly of women, while there are equal representations from government and non-government. And also, there has always been involvement in PH-OGP events of women. However, the gender issues that I mentioned were not highlighted as priority issues in open government conversations until the co-creation of the fifth NAP. This shows that the partnership and consultation that we've had with the research team from CARE International during the co-creation of the action plan were successful. We were able to consider gender issues, engage gender equality activists and women's rights organizations, and adopted the gender mainstreaming and inclusion indicators in the action plan for all commitments. Specifically, as mentioned earlier by Sir Alim of the DILG, they have included gender advocacy commitment milestones in their program. Also, the PCOO has a commitment milestone under the Freedom of Information Program to conduct capacity building and engagement activities to the women's sector, LGBT, PWDs, and IP groups. The DOF, through the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, also commits to launch a gender scoping study and gender audit tool to assess gender inclusivity among extractive companies. DepEd has a commitment milestone, as related by Ms. Tess earlier, for the inclusion of a section on ensuring gender responsive and inclusive implementation of the LMS policy. The DICT, for its part, will have gender aggregated data of ODPH portal users and feedback results, while the participatory action research of the DSWD will include gender sensitivity training for its research facilitators and will have gender sensitive and inclusive advocacy materials. We can see that there has been a big change from previous NAPs. In this current NAP, it is always in the consciousness of PH-OGP to consider gender mainstreaming and inclusion initiatives, which we are able to see in the final action plan that was shared earlier in the chat box, as we continue to co-create with our partners, not only in the action plan co-creation, but also in the monitoring framework and in the implementation process of the plan. We will consider the recommendations, and we thank Care Philippines for this toolkit that they have presented to us, which will be very useful and helpful in our co-creation process moving forward. So we will be using this in our sixth NAP co-creation activities and consultations. We at PH-OGP are happy to provide a platform and a safe space to advocate gender advancement through open government, always recognizing that women can lead in the better normal. Once again, thank you very much and congratulations to CARE for coming up with this research and the toolkit. We look forward to getting the complete set of the toolkit for us to be able to comment more on it and then to use it in our future activities and engagements. Yun lang po. Maraming salamat and good morning again to everyone. Back to you, Ms. Joey.
Salamat po, Ms. Claire. Thank you for summarizing more or less the other commitments of other agencies that were also involved in the fifth NAP co-creation process. And we truly appreciate how honest and candid we are in how we assess our performance as far as putting gender priorities in the commitments. While our successes, the agency successes are accounted for, we also are not shying away from discussing areas where we can further improve. And that's a great way for us to really monitor our commitments properly. So for another reactor, and we already had our representatives from government agencies, Ms. Tess and Sir Aline, and also Ms. Claire from the OGP Secretariat. It's great if we can tie these insights together with emphasis on the voices of women's rights organizations. So we have here this morning a representative from WROs, one of CARE's partners in many of our programs. We have Ms. Ampi Mishano, who is the Secretary General of PKKK, or Pambansang Koalisyon ng Mga Kababaihan sa Kanayunan. Ms. Ampi, over to you po.
Hi. Hello.
Hi, good morning po. We can hear
Good morning. Oo, kasi medyo nagloko yung aking computer. Well, anyway, thank you for inviting me as a reactor. The question is, how are the research findings useful to your own organization's advocacy? Actually, it's very, the results of the research are very true, especially regarding participation of women. Women in the laylayan, women in the margins who are often excluded. PKKK is working with rural women, women farmers, small fishers, indigenous women, and also women in the informal sector or the informal economy. Actually, governance is very important to women because as PKKK is also it's one of our agenda, representation and participation in governance. And it's true that for excluded women, those who are in the remote areas and those with disabilities, those with experiencing extreme poverty, especially in this period of pandemic. Um, we have to provide resources. That's what I heard from the research. It's very important for even attending online consultations. We hold online meetings, and oftentimes some of our members would have to go to the town center, and that would cost a lot of money. One in Lanao, for example, one IP woman would go to their town center, and she would need around 500 pesos to go to the town center and back for her to be able to attend online consultations or forum. And they're also we need to capacitate these women because especially in the new situation, you have to capacitate them how to use these gadgets. No? We also have to support organizing women, especially those who are in far-flung areas. We have to support them how to uh, negotiate or how to uh, speak even in this kind of venues, and also creating an enabling environment for women to participate. Um, PKKK has been consistently advocating for visibility of women farmers, fishers, IP, and informal sector. And currently we are um, campaigning on the registry system for basic sector in agriculture, and we have encountered problems of uh, government agencies like, for example, the LGU. They will not register a woman farmer because she's not a farmer. She's the wife of the husband farmer. So it takes a lot of education, awareness raising, even among women, and also on the part of the implementers, the government side. And we also experience um, red tagging. How can women participate if they are being red tagged? Some of our members are asked to surrender, uh, and surrender what? Why surrender? So these are barriers for women's participation in governance. Um, it is very important because we have to hear the voiceless. So we have to create an environment so that they can participate. And the research findings are, are true. Greater participation of other groups because it shows that only a few WROs were invited. I was able to attend a town hall meeting last 2019, and it's a huge meeting, and it's difficult for you to voice your concern. Luckily, I was able to raise some concerns during that town hall meeting, but it should have some follow-up activities for us to really include a lot of women in these town hall meetings. And commitments of government, I saw the NAP, but I haven't really gone through it thoroughly. And it's good that there are commitments of government. Aside from this, we also have commitments, international commitments. So maybe we can include this NAP alongside other international commitments like the CIDO, where I remember it very clearly in 2000, I think 6, we have was it 6? I forgot the year, but it was explicitly mentioned about rural women's participation and their unpaid their tremendous contribution to the economy, and that support should be given to them. So I don't know if what have we done regarding that. So maybe it's good that we can include those commitments that since we are signatory to these international treaties. Uh, that's I think that's my only reaction. And thank you and congratulations for the for this kind of research. It's very good. Thank you.
Salamat po, Miss Ampi. Thank you for making time because your voice is really important to make for a complete discussion this morning. And we appreciate also your candid reaction on participation in governance spaces. And yeah, we are about to open our floor to some questions. There are already several very interesting questions which our resource persons are also excited to address. But just to give context to our discussion and the importance of including women's rights organizations in governance spaces, let me share that as of the latest global gender gap report, the Philippines, when it comes to gender parity, decreased by 8 notches. But this is actually something that we should all be concerned about. Although the Philippines is still among the top 20 countries when it comes to gender parity, and the only one in Asia, and it's followed by a great margin by Lao PDR, which is at rank 43. The reason why our rankings in gender parity slipped, it's because of women's political participation. So this discussion is very important for us to address that, and we will have this opportunity exactly. So since we have already heard from our reactors, we have a few questions that were coursed through the chat box that we will be addressing. So the first is from Ms. Kay Calderon. She asks, aside from initiatives to make OGP more inclusive of women and women's issues, are there also efforts to make governance processes more feminist? That is less hierarchical, more open and democratic, less violent, less imposing, more caring, and more willing to listen? Are there efforts to formulate indicators that define what a feminist politics might look like? So that's a really great question, Ms. Calderon. And for this one, Ms. Rebecca Haynes will be the one to respond. Over to you, Rebecca.
Thanks very much. I really like this question. I think it's very well articulated. I'll respond just from what I kind of saw from the research, but I actually think it would also be interesting to hear from a government agency on it, because I think you're asking more widely than the OGP process. But just on the OGP process, I mean, one of the things that I think is so critical about distinguishing between women's participation and the participation of women's rights organizations and activists is exactly this issue that you're raising. The actual feminist perspective and way of doing things. As you pointed out, some really key elements of that about being less hierarchical and more willing to listen, less violent. Those kind of points, I think, are why it's really critical to not just gain kind of gender parity in participation, but really have feminists in the process. And you can see from the kind of alternative open government agenda that the women's rights organizations started to develop in the kind of dedicated workshop that was part of the action research. You can see the kind of priorities, right? Like they're talking about security, they're talking about the impact of conflict, they're talking about kind of equal reconstruction process, equitable reconstruction processes. they're talking about feminist environmental concerns. It's actually quite a different vision for what open government can look like, that is kind of uniquely feminist, I think. So I'm really pleased that that was raised. And if we have time, I'd be interested to hear from a government representative around a response to that question as well.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you for that response. So as Rebecca encourages our government partners to respond, are there any that would be able to respond as of now? I'm looking if there are.
What's the question again, Miss Joey? The question.
Yes, thanks. Thank you, Sir Aline. So, Miss Kay was asking, are there, aside from initiatives to make OGP more inclusive, are there also efforts to make government processes more feminist? That is, to make it less hierarchical, to make it more open and democratic, less violent, uh, less imposing and more caring and more willing to listen. So on your end, Sir Aline, aside from what you have shared earlier, are there any such initiatives from your office?
Well, there's already a law allowing citizens to participate in local governance. I think that there's really a need for the women's rights organizations to get involved in local governance, especially in local planning and budgeting, to determine where should our money be spent. Given that, for instance, the era of LGUs is around 600 to 700 billion a year for now, and it will increase to 1.3 trillion next year because of the Supreme Court ruling on the Bandaras case. So there's a lot of money actually. So there is an opportunity for citizens organizations, civil society organizations to influence the budgeting process. Kaya it is really important to get involved in local governance processes, especially for the women's rights organizations. Yeah.
Thank you, Sir Aline. That's you're right in saying that yes, government processes. There's all sorts of venues to make these participatory and inclusive for women's rights organizations. So it's a matter of creativity and also agencies espousing the right feminist values, and this will be obvious in their programs, in their plans. So, is there anyone else from our government stakeholders who would like to address the same question before we move to another question from our audience?
Joy?
Yes, is this Miss Ano? Is this Miss Tess? Yes,
Yeah,
po.
this is Tess. I just want to make some insights also that I would like to share. Not because of my age, but maybe because of my exposure to a lot of things in government and to a lot of initiatives on gender mainstreaming. Uh, well, that were perhaps and have been very, very instrumental in looking at this. Responding to that question, or at the same time, rather observation and question. Government, national government, and even our partners at the DILG, we are very much in a synergy, I should say, with the local government agency in terms of looking at how we would like or how the gender mainstreaming looks like and be best articulated, implemented, not only at the national government agency level, but also the women on the ground. Our colleague from the PKKP, and even those times yung mga kasamahan natin dyan, si Katrining, kung kilala nyo pa si Katrining, at talagang, we've been to a lot of, shall we say, struggle, crusade towards this gender mainstreaming. Through the years, and since 1995, you are very much aware that I also came from budget, no, BBM. We really fought for the inclusion of a statement in the General Appropriations Act, you know, um, influencing the budgets of agencies. And even up to now, it is still a statement and a provision under the General Appropriations Act that we should have or integrate main gender in the respective programs and projects of agencies. Having said that, even our budget call, no, the very recent budget call for 2022, and even previous years, we have indicated there a very significant budget preparation form by which the CSOs, well, I think that the different women's rights organizations and even those people's organizations were consulted by the agencies at the local level, what exactly are their demands, not examining, but maybe perhaps demand or the need, to be able to respond and meet their, shall we say, requirements. So I would say that government is not remiss on this. And now, going to the Department of Education, one of the agenda items or of the present administration, Secretary Lili Briones, is really on the, shall we say, her agenda is to strengthen transparency, accountability, and participation. And every so often, we consult, we change conversation with the different groups of not only, shall we say, people's org, and in particular, what I'm saying is the participation, the consultation, the constructive engagement, it is even very transparent in the policy formulation, in the implementation, as well as monitoring and reporting of programs and projects of the Department of Education. And Secretary Briones is very strong on this. And our current basic education learning continuity plan, as it is a response to the COVID pandemic, it is true that the voice of our CSOs, the women in particular, they are part of what we have in the cluster, education cluster, that we listen to them, we engage them. So it is something that it is an integral part of governance of the Department of Education. I'm seeing it as a very encouraging. And of course, it's a challenging at that because of what the situation is about. But then again, considering that education really is very important to all of us, the teachers, they comprise women. A very large segment of our teaching personnel are women. So we listen to them, the exactly what the demand is, and what I'm saying is the dialogue is there, and seeing to it that their voices are heard. So hierarchical, that is something na hindi mo naman maiwasan yon, no? Pero you have to have a balancing act there. No? So para yung balance, ang attention mo to both even the public institutions as well as the private schools institutions. So we do a lot of things in particular. So tama yon ang observation and question. Very valid. Thank you very much.
Thank you po, Ms. Tess. And as you have been doing in this conversation, very insightful message again. So we have several questions and we're really excited. There's one from Ms. Celia Flor and there's another from Ms. Marianne. So we have a lot of time for the open forum. Our participants are encouraged to reflect on what we've shared so far and feel free to send your questions on the chat box. But we have a question from Ms. Celia Flor. She was asking, what are the commitment of the agencies, and we be informed of their gender responsive aligned commitments? And a follow-up question to this is regarding a new cycle. So Ms. Flor is forward looking. She's already inquiring about the next cycle where WROs can be engaged from, as recommended by Rebecca, for where the WROs can be engaged from the very start of the agenda setting phase. So this question, I believe, can be answered either by my colleague Cara or by Ms. Claire. So over to you, Cara, or Ms. Claire, who can answer this.
Thank you, Joey. Sure, I'll go first, and then Claire can give a more detailed response if I overlook anything. Thank you for that question, Ms. Celia. We're so excited to have you here today. She was part of the workshop that we ran in 2019. And this is a good question. I think DepEd, the Department of Education, and DILG have already shared the ways that they have integrated gender in their current fifth NAP commitments. Maybe what I can do is share a little bit about how DSWD did theirs. They're the third agency that we engaged in a dialogue with in the course of the action research. Their commitment had something to do with participatory research, and in the course of that commitment, I facilitated the conversation with WROs and CSOs with the SWD at the time. And as they developed that commitment, there was an effort to recognize more diverse identities in the communities that they wanted to engage in their participatory research. So like we already mentioned, we know that the Philippine women's movement and women's rights organizations in our country, like Joey said, it's not monolithic. It's a very diverse, picture. And what's interesting in that conversation is we had representatives, women leaders we had leaders from LGBTQIA plus organizations working in urban poor communities, and they raised the suggestion to make the language of DSWD's commitment more inclusive. So recognizing that there are persons of diverse gender identity and sexual orientation, and recognizing that identities aren't singular, but that they're intersecting as well. And these changes were incorporated not just in the language of DSWD's commitment, but even in the design of how they were going to run the commitment, and even in the design of the process, the consultative process that they were going to do. So Claire also shared in the chat box what the final form of the NAPs are, Ms. Celia, and everyone. So it's great to take a look there. Hopefully, again, within the research, we were only able to deep dive into these three agencies, but we also took a cursory look at the other fifth NAP commitment holders. So hopefully you will find there that there are differences in how gender responsive the commitments turned out to be as a result of our involvement in the co-creation process, as Rebecca has outlined earlier. And just to share that there is also the national action plans of OGP are ongoing. The sixth one, so the fifth one is already being implemented. The sixth one, if I'm not mistaken, is set to start next year. And as Ms. Celia mentioned, definitely we are hopeful that the PH-OGP Secretariat, co-led by the Department of Budget and Management and Code NGO, the government non-government secretariat, that they already have our initial 26 women's rights organizations on file, and will be invited hopefully in the next co-creation process when we start consulting more deliberately with CSOs from the initial phase as recommended in the research. And I'll let Claire add to that if I misspoke. Wonder if Claire is here. Hello, Claire.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Cara. I agree that we will be having co-creation of the sixth NAP next year. So we have your contacts or contact details through the database that we have from the consultations in 2019, and we will be sure to engage women's rights organizations and other sectors, other non-government partners in the co-creation process. We take note of the recommendations, and I would also like to emphasize that this is an open consultation. So we don't limit the consultation to a certain sector. So this is, we try to make the co-creation as inclusive as possible. So we also consider other sectors joining in the co-creation and in the discussions. I think you covered all the rest of the question for that one. Thank you, Ms. Cara. Back to you, Ms. Jolene.
Thank you, Ms. Claire. We have, thank you for your replies to Ms. Celia's question. We have another question from Ms. Mary Ann. And I think this is a crucial question considering the context that we find ourselves rise in the incidence of violence against women and children. And this is a question that is directed to our representative from the ILG, Sir Aline. If you can provide a reply. Ms. Marian was asking if safety, shelter, and support to women who are victim survivors of VAUSI are available for them to take courage to get out of their situation. What made her ask this is because they are educating their clients and community partners on anti-VAUSI law, but to really have impact, they should know, they are assured of where to seek refuge until they are empowered to stand on their own. So this is a great question, and we hope that we can be indulged with a reply by DILG, care of Sir Aline. So over to you po.
Actually, I am not familiar with but there's an MC, issued by the DILG together with the Commission on Human Rights with regards to ensuring gender responsive interventions to COVID-19 and the new normal. And this joint memorandum circular of the DILG and the CHR provide the guidelines to all local government units to guide its programming and implementation of interventions in response to COVID-19 to ensure that women and the girls' concerns are responded to during the COVID-19 crisis. So I score better to coordinate with the Commission on Human Rights and also in the DILG, the Bureau of Local Government Supervision, because they are the one in charge of implementing this memorandum circular.
Thank you, Sir Aline. We encourage our participants who might be in roles that can address this question. Please feel free to answer. You may raise your hand to be recognized because it's very rare that we have a gathering like this. So we might as well take advantage of this opportunity to address crucial concerns as that raised by Ms. Marianne. So anyone from any agency that can maybe respond to this question, or you are encouraged to reply. So I think there are none, and it's also 11:45 noon. So maybe our participants are excited to go to the next section of this conversation, which is on formulating our next steps, our ways forward, because this conversation will find meaning if we know what direction to head to. So, okay. Oops. Okay, so it's I think our resource persons, Miss Claire, our resource persons, Cara and Rebecca, as well as our reactors, Miss Claire, Ma'am Tess, and Sir Aline and Miss Ampi from PKKK, have contributed a lot in our understanding of feminist open government and this really healthy collaboration between CSOs and WROs and government actors. And I think a key a key element of the direction where we head to is making sure that our commitments really do espouse a gendered perspective, because as I mentioned earlier, and this merits repeating, because a lot of there's already questions on the next NAP co-creation process. So Ms. Haynes really put an emphasis on how currently the commitments, while they are good commitments as far as making for open government, as far as making governments open and accountable is concerned, they have yet to really reflect a nuanced analysis of gender needs. And we emphasize that we need to make our commitments really containing the minimum standards for mainstreaming, and we also need to set sound indicators on how these commitments are being fulfilled by the stakeholders. So if I have missed anything, I am enjoining my colleagues, Cara and Rebecca, if you also have insights on how we can move forward.
Sure, thank you, Joey. I'll go first, and I'm sure Rebecca can add more. I saw that our participants today, a lot of them were local government officials who are in some way or another involved with the open government effort, the process maybe, and working with agencies in implementing their commitments. So I think the first thing is that this research, the findings and lessons and toolkit that we shared today is an invitation for our local government officials and colleagues to, again, look deliberately at the civil society organizations that you are engaging, like participation and representation are crucial in this co-creation, regardless of level, and deliberately looking at what women's rights organizations are active or present in your local area. We have plenty. Our research only engaged 26 given our time and budget, but there are plenty more. Again, a very diverse range throughout the country. So we definitely encourage you to reach out to women's rights orgs and civil society organizations also espousing or advocating gender equality, and have them be a part of your conversation and your decision making. So reach out to them, and we have these tools as well, so that it is meant to be a two-way thing. Like, the burden isn't just on WROs to take part in the conversation or to participate in open governance. Like, there has to be that mutual accountability and mutual effort on the side of local and national government as well, to involve them deliberately and not just in a tokenistic way. And the toolkit is a way also for OGP commitment holders. I see some of them in this conversation, a way for them to create their own, perhaps make their own, if they want to make their own workshops or facilitate their own dialogues. The excellent tools that Tam O'Neill and Rebecca Haynes developed around gendered political economy analysis are there. And it's for use, not just for government, but also for women's rights organizations who want to participate more actively or strengthen their capacity in participating within the open government partnership infrastructure. So we're excited to see how this moves forward. Again, there's another cycle in the OGP for the 6th NAP coming up, and definitely a good space to prepare and look at how we can then use these lessons and recommendations into that next phase of the process. But again, there's also more that can still be done at present. And I'll hand over to Rebecca if she has more to add.
Hey, thanks, Kara. Yeah, I mean, maybe just to reinforce, I think the keys for us are to bring women's rights organizations in at the very earliest stages to influence the kind of shape of the agenda and the core ideas that kind of become the foundation of the next NAP. To set kind of minimum standards for what gender mainstreaming needs to look like, but also consider reserving a space, a commitment space in the agenda, in the NAP for a gender equality commitment that's kind of wholly focused on a gender equality issue that's kind of driven by women's rights organizations and prioritized by them, just to make the integration really strong, to have that anchor sort of there in the NAP for women's rights organizations involvement. And on gender mainstreaming, I would say minimum standards, but also, one thing I would say probably some commitment holders would benefit from is also technical assistance in the design, because it might not be immediately obvious to everyone that's doing the drafting how exactly to do quite strong or ambitious gender mainstreaming. So providing technical assistance, whether that's from civil society or from inside the government agencies or inside, the whole of government, which I know there's quite a lot of technical capacity there, making sure that that's available to the commitment holder agencies during the early drafting, I think would also really help the kind of the early drafts to be stronger as well.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Rebecca. That's a very important reminder to really make the commitments. And this bears repeating. Maybe they'd be a bit annoyed that we keep making this point that we really need to make those commitments, not only about making governments open, but really making them gender mainstreamed. And towards that end, Miss Celia has a suggestion. Thank you for that. Maybe we come up with a pilot of a women-focused agenda as a commitment. So yes, everyone agrees. That is a great suggestion. And I think in the next weeks we will be organizing another similar activity as this. And everyone, this time in our next round, our WROs, aside from those that participated in the 2019 series of activities, we welcome more WROs, and I understand that there's been a flourishing of such organizations, grassroots organizations, in response to the pandemic. And a lot of these are led by women, young women in particular. And this is really an exciting opportunity for us. And hopefully we have a lot of such organizations. Okay. Is my audio okay? Okay. Yes, as I was saying, we have a lot of opportunity for these organizations to be part of the next cycle of the co-creation process. So I know, aside from our partnerships with PKKK, Care Philippines has a great network of women-led CSOs and women's rights organizations that we can connect with our government partners for the next NAP co-creation cycle, the sixth cycle, which I believe will begin next year. Is that correct, Ms. Claire?
Yes, Miss Joey, that's correct. Thank you.
Okay, we have a few minutes left. We have some more comments. Mr. Laureano also shared that women gender mainstreaming can include also the cooperatives. Yes, that's a great idea. Cooperatives, because we have a gender and development committee. So Mr. Mesias is representing SVD PMPC, which I suppose is a people's cooperative. So yes, if you have women leaders in your cooperative, they are very much welcome to be involved. And we have another question from Ms. Calderon. How can we participate in the making of the next SNAP? And I believe this is a question that can be directed to Claire, if we have the time.
Yes. Thank you for the question, Ms. Calderon. We will start the co-creation process through consultations with various stakeholders, CSOs, which include the women's rights organizations and other groups. So we will be sending out that invitation for the consultations, which will happen in a series. So kapag nagsimula po tayo ng consultations, we will be sure to send you an invitation where we can have that kung physical man po, whether this is physical meeting later on or gagawin po natin via online platforms. So ayan po, we will be sending you that invitation for the consultation. Thank you.
Thank you, Miss Claire. That's very assuring to hear that from your team. And if this round of consultations will be conducted online, we recognize that there are some tech challenges, and there should be ways for us, our partners, to provide for support in terms of communications allowance, for us to have a better participation. So there's also another comment from Cara, but I think she agreed that it's great to maximize the GAD committees, and we encourage using existing infrastructure to strengthen gender efforts. So we have 4 minutes left. Unless we have other questions, we have a few reminders. This has been a really rich discussion, and we hope that we can extend this, but lunch is waiting for most of us. So just a reminder for our partners who might need e-certificates. These will be provided by email. We encourage everyone to accomplish the feedback form. The link is provided, and there is also a QR code that you can conveniently scan, and this will take you to the link. And once we accomplish this feedback form, the organizers will be emailing the e-certificates. And if we have questions, sorry, I'll flash that for a bit longer, the previous slide. So our partners can go to the link. So that's provided here. And also, if everyone would, if anyone has questions about this initiative and other programs of Care Philippines, we can reach through our social media accounts and our websites, which are all flashed on the screen right now. So we look forward to hearing from you, from your insights. Maybe you need a bit more time to reflect on what we shared today. And also, yes, before we end this session, we invite everyone to join the afternoon session for today. This is organized by the CSO Education Cluster. It's from 2 to 4 p.m. and the QR code is also provided, so you can register for the session if you haven't. And yes, that's it for today. Thank you so much for making time for this conversation, and we look forward to connecting with you. Miss Cara provided her email so we can reach her directly. And let's enjoy our lunch, and we hope that this will be this won't be the last conversation. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ay,
Thank
thank
you,
you.
Joey.
Thank you,
Salamat po.
Rebecca. Salamat sa lahat. Thank
Yeah,
you.
salamat
And
din.
Salamat
thank you.
po.
Bilang isang mangingistan, sa buhay ko ang prinsipyo ng women-led. Dahil unang-una, nadibang ako, nawala ang stress ko sa pagdaragat, nakalimutan ko ang hirap ng buhay bilang magdaragat. At saka isa pa, nakatulong ako sa mga kapwa ko kababaihan na asawa ng mga mangingisda. Nahikayat ko sila na magkaroon at nabigyan ng mapagsisimula ang mapagkakakitaan sa tulong ng PKKK at ng Care Philippines ng Willie. Kahit na walang nahuhuling isda, hindi na maghihirap kasi meron na rin na kahit pa paano may mapagsisimula ang na negosyo.
Ang tutunan sa Feminist ay ang pantay-pantay na pamumuhay sa panahon ngayon kahit anong kasarian at kailangan itong maintindihan ng bawat isa.
Ang nais kong mangyari para sa sunod na henerasyon ng mga kababaihan, kailangan mayroon tayong determinasyon, mangarap sa pamilya, at lalo na magpakat as a leader ng kababaihan para makita sa komunidad na tayo kaya tumayo bilang mga babae.